All right, last on the list of TV and video measurement and attribution methods are proxy channel measures. This is using a less expensive online video platform to test our television-bound creative all before we actually run it on TV. Because if we can foretell something about how it's going to perform using this lesser expensive option, it'll save us a whole bunch of costs on the media side. This isn't so much an attribution method as it is a measurement method to save a boatload of money on the testing side. Easily, you can save a single campaign could save several $1,000,000 by doing a proxy channel measure approach, even if it's modestly sized national level. Now, I know folks in the industry are probably cringing already when I talk about this because the current pulse of the industry is, Tim, you can't use an online channel to foretell anything about how a creative is going to work in the real world on television media because the way that the video is consumed on linear TV versus on online television are so different. I call BS on that. We see the relationship all the time. All you do is you join the smart television data to your YouTube data on the same exact creative that's run on both, and we can see that there's a stat-sig correlation. So that is incorrect. Now, not only is it incorrect, and it has been incorrect for a long time, but also you have to keep in mind that the signal is actually getting better over time because the line between online and offline television is starting to blur and narrow in. In fact, I think of YouTube and how my kids consume YouTube. They're not doing it on a phone or any type of device like that. They're consuming YouTube on Roku, which is connected to the same exact TV that's receiving linear ads. And so we're actually measuring something about real world television, like living room TV sets, when we're doing this insight, looking at these insights but online. But the real cool thing is we didn't even need that. It turns out that there are proxy signals you can get out of even online video consumption that tell us something useful about how the ads are likely to run in the real world on television. So let's get into how we could save a bunch of money this way. So there's different ways of doing this. I'm going to show you the preferred way and talk a little bit about how it works, why it works, where things could go wrong. So we're going to use Google Ads. This is going to be video experiments. And we're going to do a traditional split test. So we're going to have a test group, control group, control. The test group has the creative, the video asset that we haven't yet run on media. And hopefully we're not going to if this test shows us a bad result. And then the control side is either going to have another creative of unknown value. It could be a creative that actually ran on TV where we have a ground truth, possibly through ACR data, so we know how this works. You could also use a PSA, so a public service announcement where it has a known 0 return on ad spend for your brand. Using one of these other creatives is preferable though. Now I'm going to gloss over some of the details just for the sake of brevity. There's a decent amount of setup in terms of how the campaigns and the ad groups are structured. There's a decent setup in terms of the targeting of the impressions. There's setup involved in how you're selecting the metric that the tests are performing to. But when all is said and done, what you're going to do is you're going to get impressions on these creatives. What's going to blow your mind is that we can say things that are relevant and that are predictive about how $6-7 million Super Bowl ads are going to run within about 24 hours of doing these experiments for very little cost. So the insights are really cool, really powerful, and can easily save millions of dollars in mistakes. All right, so we have impressions. Now, here's where things get interesting, and this is part of the reason why the industry is so adamant that you can't use online to predict anything about TV. So if you look at the default data that YouTube and other video platforms will give you back, such as clicks, views, revenue, downstream revenue if you've connected, or various ratios based on this. I've personally confirmed time and time again that yes, these do not correlate with TV. So if you measure these on YouTube or via another online channel and you compare it to your TV, I have never seen a relationship between all of the standard measures of how YouTube is working versus television. In fact, I've seen even some weak negative correlations with clicks, meaning that YouTube assets that get more clicks actually perform worse on television. It's a very weak negative correlation. And likely it's somewhat related to folks that are clicking on your ad are just trying to escape and watch their content. And so they're not interested. And so it's actually giving us a signal that the creative isn't as effective. But it turns out there's better ways, and that relationship is very weak and breaks. What we're specifically looking for there are hundreds of other metrics that YouTube is keeping track of within the realm of these video experiments. And we're specifically interested in how folks are watching your ad. More specifically, how they're engaging on the ad itself. And there's different metrics you could use here, but that's what we're after. That's what you'll find correlates with your smart TV, ACR, linear television, OTT, CTV data. Now, why is this relevant, and why does this correlate with what happens in the real world? So let's do a quick lesson on what drives TV ROAS. So you have two major things. You have your media, you have your creative. Obviously, what we're testing for here is just on the creative side. When you actually measure and look at the responsiveness and return on ad spend versus media for a campaign that's been running for a while, what we typically see on the media side is something like this. So this is your ROAS, and these are media changes. By media changes, this would be the inventory, the ad inventory that you're buying, what networks, what day parts, time, how much you're paying for various inventory. What you'll find is in the earliest days of your campaign, if you're on my team and if you're doing things right, you're going to get a huge boost in return on ad spend. But then after a while, you start leveling off because you kind of learn what the right price points are for everything. And then you kind of just plateau off. You're still going up, but it's incremental gains. Whereas with creative, even for a mature campaign or mature team that's been running television for a while, you could insert a new creative and get a 3x multiple on that new creative, meaning that every single dollar that I'm putting into media is now getting 3x magnification based on just that one creative that goes in, assuming we've scaled it out. And for that reason, when you actually do a measure and you say, well, what's the responsiveness of ROAS to changes on media and creative, media only counts for about 20% of ROAS, whereas on creative, about 80% of the ROAS is dictated by creative. And it comes down to both this plateauing effect on the media side and the fact that if we put a new horse in the race with creative, it could very well work better than what we had before, even for a mature campaign. So we are working on where things really matter here on the creative side in what we're doing on this proxy channel measure here. But let's talk a little bit about that engagement piece. So what does it take for a creative to then generate return on ad spend downstream? Well, someone actually has to be watching the creative. So you need someone to initially watch, but then they need to stick around to the point where they actually understand what it is that the creative is doing. And it turns out that understanding requires that you've captured them. You need to retain them for long enough in the ad in order to get to that understanding of what the message is, what even the brand is, in order to stand a chance at ROAS. And it turns out that when you look at data for what parts of the creative are most sensitive, you basically have 7 seconds to get folks' attention, to get them engaged. Otherwise, you don't stand a chance of your message coming through. You don't stand a chance of even your brand being recognized. And if you don't get those things, then zero ROAS. So that initial early engagement is table stakes to getting anything more than zero return on ad spend, right? So in order to give your message a chance to work, in order to give your brand a chance to work, you need to get that engagement. If you do get that engagement, we're not saying the ROAS is going to be good because you still have a lot of work to do here. But it's going to be you have a chance of a non-zero ROAS, whereas if you don't get that initial engagement, you're guaranteed zero ROAS. That's what we're measuring something about here. That initial engagement data that we're getting from a proxy channel measure on an online channel is telling us something about our ability to capture attention in that first early period for us to have an at-bat of getting everything else through, the call to action, through the messaging, through so on and so forth. So where can we break this whole thing? Well, what are the limitations? So this method doesn't tell you anything about what happens after that initial engagement. So it doesn't tell you anything about, does your call to action work? If you were to say remove your brand name from a commercial, you'll break this, right? So if you remove your brand, folks don't know that it might be engaging content, but they may not know it's associated with your brand. So by just removing your brand, you could force your ROAS to zero, and even though you had a good result here. So those are just some of the ways it works. Oh, one of the other limitations is that it only works for comparing like durations. So a 7 to a 7 second, a 15 to a 15, 30 to 30, 60 to 60. You can't compare a 7 to a 30 directly using this method. Haven't found an approach yet to make that work. But there's another limitation that I think that's worth talking about here, which is you still need an asset to test, right? So you still need the production with this method, and that has cost. What if I could tell you that there's a way to avoid that production in the first place, right? Because that's one of the big cost drivers. Remember when we said that there's a 1800x cost to learn on television? We need to chip that away relative to other marketing channels. So this method here is helping us avoid the media spend on things that are unlikely to work, so that we can make fixes to it before we actually run it on media. So that's going to reduce this substantially, but you still have the production cost. So one of the things that we do at Videoquant is it turns out there is a really cool, slick technique that we have multiple patents pending on, where we can anticipate how concepts are going to work in the real world on linear television, on OTT, CTV, as well as other online video platforms, before ever actually investing in production cycles. And so now we can cut this 1800 down to be a comp to SEM. And that's kind of the key insight that we had. If we can improve the testing costs and lower the cost to learn on television and make it comparable to other marketing channels, we can really drive results on this.